Hello, everybody. Good to be back with you on another lecturette, if you will, video. This chapter is on social stratification, and I'm not going we don't have enough time for me to go through all of this chapter, but there's a couple of points I do want to stress, and just so you're clarified. I think the one on social class and caste system, I'd like to summarize those two systems of stratification up for you and tidy up some concepts there that I think that will help you place these in sort of a model, if you will, that you may find doable. I'm going to take these glasses off, even though I need them now for reading as well as for driving, but they seem to be glaring into the camera. So uh, anyway, I just want to make one announcement that next week, from Wednesday until late evening Friday, I'm going to be doing some paper presentations at the Mid South Sociological Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. So it doesn't really mean I'll be out of touch. I may not get to my email as much during the day, but I certainly will be in touch. I will have my computer. So if you have a question, feel free to send them to me, and I will be online during that time. Uh, but in terms of stratification starts this chapter, and the next two chapters are dealing with structural stratification in our society. This chapter basically looks more at social class. Next chapter looks at race. Our society is also stratified by race and ethnicity, and our society is also stratified by gender. Um, and generally, we think of these as cultural categories, and they are, but they're also structural categories. That is, how our society or societies are structured along class lines. That is, structured, what we call structured social inequality. We point fingers at various groups for causing social inequalities. In actuality, a lot of the social inequalities that we see in society is built into the very foundations of the society itself. So, for example, capitalist society has built into it a system of social inequality between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or in our latest video that I placed for you to view and comment on the 1% and 99% currently. These are built into the system itself. The system tends to generate, we're taught the ideology is that under our capitalist system, that it produces simply freedom, democracy, which neither one of those has anything to do with capitalism. Capitalism is simply an economic system. Democracy, and talking of freedom and democracy, is that's a political ideology. It has nothing to do with economics. You could run a capitalist system which has pretty much been shown under a communist society, if you will, politically. So capitalism is an economic system that is built on profit, individual profit, or corporate profits, private property, and it tends to generate because of the inequalities between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the elites, owners of capital, and the working class, if you will. And in today's society, it can mean all of us that are working for a wage or working for a salary, uh, that it produces social inequality between the so-called haves and have-nots. Always has, and just the nature, the logic of the system itself produces social inequality. So while yes, capitalism may produce a lot of wealth and lots of commodities, nice things to have, material comfort, it also produces misery and poverty and homelessness and all the negatives that we see in society, that we tend to, in our culture, we tend to blame individuals for, is really just built right into how our society is structured. Uh, and so you have theorists like in conflict theory, if we want more equality, we have to start by actually rearranging or restructuring the society itself if we want to develop more equality. But anyway, in terms of the book definition, social stratification is a systematic process of ranking people on a scale of social worth such that the ranking affects life chances in unequal ways. So it's saying that it's a pattern formed of ranking of people, systematic. It's not random. So systematically places some folks at the top and other folks in the middle, perhaps, and others at the bottom of the chain or the hierarchy, if you will. Such stratification and social inequality pretty much equate each other. A stratification in which social inequality is a situation in which these valued resources and desired outcomes, for example, college education, long life, are distributed in such a way that people have unequal amounts and or access to them. So you can say that the pie is unequally divvied up, and some groups have more access to scarce resources in the society than other groups do. One of the reasons, or maybe one of the primary reasons why sociologists are so interested in studying social inequality is because of the fact that it pervades our life, and it determines a lot about our outcome. So the term we have for that outcome is life chances. The probability that an individual's life will follow a certain path and will turn out a certain way. So in our society, the life chances in our society, you can think of it as the good life. What are the chances for individuals in our society to realize the good life? And a lot of that good life, from our value point of view, is material comfort, but also to have health care, to have the chance to have a relaxing vacation every year, less stress, to have access to housing, education. So even things like access to culture represent your group or your history. We talk about the history of some groups in our society being written by the conquerors from their standpoint of view. So all of these are the scarce resources, and we could mention many others that people in society, from a conflict perspective, are struggling over. Between the haves and the have-nots, those that have more than others, those on the bottom are wanting a voice. Civil rights, for example, has been an issue of a resource that some people have more access to than others. Sociologists are very interested in studying stratification because of the effects it has on our lives over time. And it's one area in sociology that's been just studied decade after decade. There's just thousands and thousands of research projects that have been money as well poured into the research of the effects of one's social class background, for example. And we know from all of these empirical studies that our social class background really has a profound impact on our values, our beliefs, our norms, our outlook on life, whether, even things like our choices in terms of our careers, our education, and other many important areas, like how long we're going to live, for example, is affected by social class. Even things like our religious preferences are affected by social class. Just a whole host of social indicators are determined, or at least profoundly shaped by one's social class background. Many sociologists feel if we just know if we know the social class background of an individual, instead of like a psychologist having to sit down and interview them in depth and find out about their individualistic psychological makeup, if you will, if we can just simply know their social class background, look at the parents' occupation, where they're from, rural or urban areas, just knowing the social class background and knowing the cultural, for example, and structural makeup of that particular social class can tell us a lot about that individual without having to really ask them too much about their own individual histories. We're pretty good predictors about what their values will be, what their politics will be, their opinions on a whole host of indicators, their gender attitudes towards gender. All of this can be gleaned simply by, not 100%. We don't want to say that we know a person 100%, but we can say that we can know by a high probability, by knowing one's social class background, a whole host of these aspects of one's life, one's outlook, one's beliefs, one's values, for example, are pretty well. We're good at it. We get a high probability of knowing a lot about individuals simply by telling us about your social class background. So as I said before, it is highly studied in sociology. And it's one of my backgrounds is in conflict theory in graduate school, and we studied a lot about not only national stratification, but as this chapter talks about dependency theory, for example, I wrote my master's thesis on world systems theory, dependency theory, and looked at the history of that intellectual tradition. So life chances is an important area of study for sociologists. What's the probabilities that a person born in an urban poor community is likely to get involved in deviant subcultures, for example? This kind of research, how long a person will live if born in a certain strata in society. But let's look at these two historical systems of social stratification globally. One is called the caste system of social stratification. The other one is called the class system. And I'm going to tie in a few concepts by placing these under each one and just give a stark contrast between these two systems. I think that'll help you gather in the concepts that are attached to these two types of stratification systems. So starting with the caste system, excuse me, a caste system is a system, if you want to think in your imagination, as a society. Take an example of a society that seems static, that people are stuck in the position they're in, and there's no what we call social mobility. There's no moving up or down in that society. People are born into an ascribed status in terms of their ranking in society. So let me just lay out these concepts. So the caste system of stratification is a closed system, we call it. And before we really talk about caste system and class system, we're talking about these two types. We call them ideal types in sociology. They're ideal types in that they've been theorized in terms of their pure features, if you will, their characteristics. So we call them ideal types, and then what we do is we analyze societies, real existing societies, against these ideal types to see how they fit, or to see how the ideal type varies from society to society. So the ideal type of a caste system is that the caste system is what we call a closed system. And the system is closed not because people can't move out or move into that society. It's a closed system based on the statuses within that system. So an ascribed status of stratification is based on, the status is based on ascription. And what is an ascribed status? An ascribed status is a status that you're born with. And it's something that you really can't change about you. I always like to go to the book definition just to make sure we touch base. But the ascribed statuses are social positions assigned on the basis of attributes people possess through no fault of their own. I'm having a hard time reading this small print. Those attributes are acquired at birth, such as skin shade, sex, or your hair color. Develop over time, such as height, weight, baldness, wrinkles, or reproductive capacity, or possessed through no effort or fault of their own, such as the country into which or one is born in religious affiliation, inherited from parents. So again, it's something that one is born with, uh, or grows into, such as becoming older in the old age. Well, that's an ascribed status. Uh, so it's something that's like one's ethnicity or one's race, something we can't really do much about. So in the caste system, it's a closed system because the statuses are based on description. And in the caste system, you have different levels of the caste, so that at the bottom of the caste system, those who are like the outcasts in the Indian caste system, which is the best example. People are fixed into place for not only their lives, but for their whole lineage. So maybe going back away into history and into the future. If you're born on the lowest scale, it doesn't matter about your achievement status. Achievement status is what we achieve on our own. So, positively, one can become socially mobile. Mobility, moving from one class system position to another through efforts such as going through getting a college education, through education. That's a positive. That's an achievement status. It can be the converse as well, downward mobility. So one may get in trouble with the law for whatever reason, selling drugs, get caught, put in prison. One may become downwardly socially mobile, and that would be an ascribed status as well. So becoming homeless could be an achievement status depending on circumstances. But anyway, so in a caste system, the statuses ideotypically are based on scribe status. So no matter how good a person you are, no matter how smart you are, your talents, it's not going to make any difference. You're born into that system, and in that case, then it's closed. There's little to no, and I'd rather say that there's no ideotypically. There is no social mobility in a true ideotypical caste system. You're simply fixed into place. Maybe at the disadvantage of those in the bottom, but certainly a big advantage to those that are born at the top, right? So those at the top of the scale, no matter how bad a person they are, or how inventive they are, or whatever, they're not going to lose their higher status. They're fixed there. So their generation, their children on down the line will be at the very pinnacle of the caste system, and they will not lose that out. Of course, we see that from a conflict perspective. The system is biased towards that group. That it works in their advantage, right? So caste system, closed system. That closed system is based on ascribed statuses. Scribes, because it's based on ascribed statuses, there's no social mobility. Best historical example would be a society like India, where you had the Indian caste system, and that caste system was based in religion, Hindu religion, and that basing that in the religion also was taking a functionalist theory. It was very functional in an agricultural society. So most of your earlier agricultural empires, for example, Egypt and others, and then like India, a great agricultural society, the caste system is very functional because, for one thing, people are working on the land generation after generation. You have a small number of big landlords, right? And generally they're at the top, so they're protected. You think of the Egyptian pharaohs, they were at the top of the system. And then they could use a facade of legitimacy to help cement that power, because usually those at the top of the caste system will claim that they have some access to the supreme being, if you will. Yeah, in the Indian caste system, it had to do with the idea of one life after another, right? Predetermination. That idea fit well with the caste system. The notion that one is born again and again and through evolution, many thousands or maybe millions of births later, one may end up born into the top of the caste system, and one will be godly in nature. One will be one of the enlightened. Uh, and so, from the Hindu standpoint, Hindu religion standpoint, those that are at the very bottom of the historically at the bottom of the caste system were new beings. They were new beings, haven't evolved as yet, and through millions of maybe lifetimes, they'll eventually end up near the top. So you can see how ideologically that kind of seals the legitimacy of the landed class at the top from a conflict perspective. Don't bother us because we can send the locusts down on your small crops if you bother us. We speak to God, God speaks through us, and we tell you what God has in store for you. And so in that way it's legitimized, becomes legitimized, what we call legitimized social inequality. It's legitimized to some extent for those both at the bottom and those at the top. And it helps to keep that society, that highly socially unequal society. It helps to cement that society and to keep it well-oiled and keep it functioning, right? Now, in the opposite of the caste system is what we call the caste system. So in the class system, and in the class society, it's just the opposite. In class society, we call it ideal typically now. We're talking about the typical, in theory, the ideal typical, that it's based not in it's not a closed society, it's an open society. And again, the reason why we say that the class system is open is because it's based on not ascribed statuses, but on achievement statuses. People have the freedom to move from one class level to the next, right? Through their own efforts. So, the ideology in our society of the bootstrap theory, if one will only pull oneself up by one's bootstraps, right? Of course, you got to have boots first, but pull oneself up by one's bootstraps, one may move up in the social order. Conversely, a person can also become downwardly socially mobile, so one's achievement may be negative. And through one's own responsibility, one's behavior, one may fall down, one may become homeless in the end, right? And or go to prison, right? So, at one level, caste system is more predictable, if you will. If you want to think about it in a positive way, life becomes more predictable. In a society like ours, we're riddled with anxiety, right? We're gonna, with all this shenanigans going on in Washington today, with some trying to shut the government down. They're going to blow my 401k out of the water, and I'm going to end up walking the streets. And that kind of social anxiety we see, we can't really predict the future because it's an open society. It's based on achievement statuses. The future is not known, right? And so it's an open society based on achievement statuses. So with those achievement statuses, then typically, there should be a lot of social mobility in that society, a lot of movement. People moving from the bottom to the top. People from the top, for whatever bad behaviors or bad luck, are moving towards the bottom, or they become downwardly socially mobile. So if we look at cases like the United States. In terms of functionality, going to the functionalist theory, the class system of stratification evolves with industrialization. So no longer do you need people tied to the soil. You need people to be able to be mobile, on the move, to follow the job market, right? And also because in industrial society, the stratification system the division of labor becoming much more complex. We have many more occupations that require certain skill levels, and so that you need people to be able to go to the universities, to move up, to fill those positions in the complex division of labor. You have a complex hierarchy of occupations from high to low, and from the functional standpoint, that kind of society, people will fall along the lines where they should fall in. So those who don't really have a lot of desire to go on to college, they may end up working in working class positions or becoming a garbage collector, for example. Or if they want to go into a simple trade, they may have certain skills, as they building homes or becoming a barber or a cook or. So, and then others who aspire to more, who have the ability to go for as they becoming a upper middle class in terms of lawyer or a lower upper class surgeon, for example. So people will fall where their inclinations are, where their talents and their aspirations. Again, the bootstrap theory. They'll end up where they aspire to be in some sense, and it's functional because in the end, in society's hierarchy of occupations, will be fulfilled. And in terms of the inequality, in terms of income, those that are willing to put themselves off and to struggle through, years and years of education and hard work, moving to the top, they deserve to have that higher remuneration for their job than say somebody that just wants to collect garbage, for example. Of course, that view, this most contemporary view of the inequality in terms of wealth inequality. The video I have on the blackboard for you to analyze. Uh, it's hard to make that argument with the 1% in terms of the vast differences between for example, the CEO's income and that of the secretary, right? Vast inequality there. Um, so it gets hard. One way that we conflict theorists sometimes poke at the functionalist notion is that yes, the cream does rise to the top, and if you look at that stratification system historically, it's been dominated by white males. So historically, it's been yes, the cream of the crop have risen to the top, and it's been just one narrow section of peoples that who've been so successful in that 1%, and all the rest kind of trickle down, if you will. But it's very problematic. Functionalism is a great theory. If you want to know why something exists over the long run, functionalism always has an answer. Is it socially just? Is it justified? Is it ethically justified? Functionalists don't ask those questions. It exists because it keeps society ongoing. Conflict theorists puts that on their outer sleeve. That society, yes, it is functional, but in whose interest does it function? Are there certain groups and the way things are organized, like the class system and the income, is organized so that certain groups at the top have the political clout because of their wealth to be able to pass laws and policies that in the end fill their pockets and their needs and not the rest of society. And I think we see a lot of that going on today in our political system, dysfunctional. I wouldn't call it very functional. I don't think many of you would either, but a lot of that dysfunctionality has a lot to do with ongoing class conflict, both nationally and globally. So there's your two systems. Now, in terms of social mobility in the real class system, like our own society, there's some of us who see that extreme poverty, and as you read in the chapter, those in the very bottom, those in the most extreme poverty, and also conversely those at the very top of the system, the 1%. Hard to say that it's tough to say that that's achievement status. That's more maybe at one time, but that's more of an ascribed status. That's more like a caste. So in our society, we still have caste features in terms of social class. Those at the very bottom, those at the very top is very caste-like. We know statistically that those are the people that actually escape dire poverty, generation after generation, is very, very small. So most people born into dire poverty, they'll remain there for the rest of their lives, and their children will too. Do they escape? Yes, people do escape poverty, and they usually end up becoming ideological pawns through the media. And so, we always have these stars of football players, sports figures, movie stars. Oh, they started at the very bottom. These country singers, right? They started out as sharecroppers, and they end up becoming these. Of course, some of their stories are a little bit fictionalized, if you will. Uh, but it's true that some people do escape, and the powers that be love to make examples of those to show that, hey, if they did it, you can do it too if you just try a little bit harder. Of course, we in sociology conflict theorists know that's definitely not true. That the majority of people that are born either at the top or the bottom tend to remain there. So, for example, if you could have a bad apple among the one of the 1% blue blood families, if you will, Rothschild or even a Kennedy. We've seen examples here, kids that go awry and do some things that other kids maybe less fortunate would spend a life in prison. But most of the time they get a small slap on the wrist and they get in trouble, but they're still wealthy. They're never going to lose their wealth. They're never going to be walking. Let's say it this way: unless there's some really great national crisis or tragedy, I doubt we'll see any Kennedys or Rothschilds walking around on the street homeless in New York City in the next 100 years. So once they're born into wealth, they at the very top they tend to stay there. So it's very caste-like and dire poverty. So where do we see the most social mobility? There is social mobility in our society, and we've seen it mostly in the middle class. So this ideology, this notion, is actually most illustrated in the middle class. So people from the working class can go to college, get their degrees, and maybe go all the way to getting a PhD and work their way right on up into the upper middle class, right? That's happening every day, So there's still a lot of social mobility from the lower working middle class up to the upper middle class. Still very, very possible. Though that's becoming limited even as we speak. When you look at that video on the wealth inequality, the middle class is really, in the last couple of decades, but especially in the last few years, has really been squeezed out. One, with the earlier NAFTA agreement, a lot of companies, a lot of our industries left the country. And what some of you may not know, with the hoodwinking of this going on with this show we see about a government shutdown, which I think is pretty much something that's kind of like a wrestling match for me. You know how they make up the wrestling match seems so exciting, but there's working in the back of the scenes. It's all put together. And I think that is true from my own personal, from my outlook on it. But what is happening right now that you may not know of is they're working quickly to sign another NAFTA agreement. It's called the Pacific NAFTA agreement with the Pacific countries, Australia, Vietnam, so that there's a big chance that a lot of the industry we have left will be leaving also. So we're quickly deindustrializing our whole country, and what that has done is it's thrown a lot of people out of work, delegitimizing the unions. So a great proportion of our employment today is in fast food and part-time labor. So the middle class, in terms of social mobility, is really beginning to shrink. And so there's a lot of competition for jobs. An educated degree is not always an easy walk into the upper middle class just because one has a degree. So even in terms of historically, the middle class has been the arena where we see a lot of social mobility. But we still have caste-like features in our class society in terms of things like race. One's race and ethnicity can still be an ascribed status that blocks one's ability to compete on an equal footing historically, right? And to today, I mean, you look at civil rights, that was only in the 1960s. That's not that long ago. So a lot of African Americans are just now really beginning to compete and gain their degrees, and so an unequal footing. Same thing with gender. Gender is another area we can think of as an ascribed status that blocks women's ability to compete in the job market, for example. And then again, too, with the problem with poverty as an ascribed status. So they're still there in our society. We would say that our society then is not a pure capitalist or pure class society at all. It's actually a mixed system of stratification. Yes, we have class forces as well as we have caste forces as well working, and so we still have a good long road to go. It looks longer, I guess, every day as we see the conditions that we're in at the moment in terms of our economic situation and the problems of inequality and wealth, which the public is becoming much more educated about than they were in the past about this issue. I'm going to stop there, and if you happen to have any questions about any of the concepts in this chapter, please email me, and I'd be glad to respond to you. I was putting it on as a question for everybody, or a place on the blackboard, but I didn't get any response. And I sometimes wonder if students may be a bit self-conscious about having to ask questions. So feel free to email me individually about any of these theories, concepts, and I am more than happy to write you back and give you a full explanation as best I can and give you examples of further for that chapter. We may spend a little more time with the one on race. I think we have enough time to do that. It's one of my specialties, and it's one that I really like to spend a little bit more time on as we go into next week's chapter. So I will inform you about about how further we will go. I'm going to be out of town next week. That's another reason why I have some things I want to accomplish with that chapter. So we'll play it by ear, and I'll be back with you about the next chapter. And so go ahead and study up, and I'll also have you a couple more videos on the blackboard to check out in terms of social class. Okay, everybody, have a great rest of the week and a great weekend.